come up with a solution, and if it's just executed correctly, we will produce certain results. The problem is, if you look at reality of policymaking, there's not a neat separation between policy formulation and implementation. The outcomes of a policy, what the policy actually is, are changed by implementation. They are actually determined by implementation. So, for example, privatization. There was no policy of privatization. Government decided to sell discrete industries off, and they came up with tactics to make it work, and gradually out of these series of actions they began to formulate, if you like, a new policy that about reshaping the state and the shape of the state and the citizen. Housing benefit cut £400. If you look at the impact assessment, DWP, they actually say we don't know what's going to happen. That's why we have a large contingency fund. Implementation is not simply a derivative of a plan. It actually determines what a policy is. But more importantly than this, if you are in central government, you have a policy and you think, oh, it's okay, implementation does change things, but we'll just try and control that. We'll try and stop drift away from our plan. You fail to realise that actually there may be positive outcomes here. People may be adapting to the situation they're in order to improve the policy and come up with something much better, because the world is complex, because things change. Yet policymakers don't seem to understand this. They seem to see this process in a very mechanistic way. The machine is not responding how I want it to. We may need to think more about a complex system. Indeed, in the report, I won't go into it now, but give some examples of where thinking about a policy in very discrete terms has led to problems, because people haven't appreciated they're dealing with a system like the criminal justice system. If you affect sentencing in one part of the system, the whole system tries to realign. So there's a challenge here not to see adaptation as purely a bad thing. But the second point is, what do you do with all this? Okay, all very interesting. What does that mean for me in Whitehall? Well, we suggest that there are two main things that policymakers really need to think about if all this is true. Firstly, making a judgment about the level at which a particular policy problem should be dealt with. Is it one which is fairly simple and straightforward? We know what we want to achieve. It has to be right first time. In that case, project management may be perfectly the right way to go about it. But instead, if we're dealing with a more complex issue, we don't really know what we want to achieve, it's unlikely that a pre-formulated plan will be able to come up with the solution. Then we should perhaps allow some flexibility and adaptation to come in. We give an example through the Olympics. Building the Olympic Stadium is very different from regenerating Stratford, and you need a different approach. So there's a point around judgment, which needs to be informed by complexity. And the second thing is what oversight needs to be maintained by Whitehall. Until local democracy flourishes, until taxation ceases to be entirely national, Whitehall is going to have some role. But what is that role in a world where you may have given away power? We talk about a continuing system stewardship role. You can see this in Scotland, for example. They've moved towards a single outcome agreement with much greater freedom. The idea being, if you're dealing with a complex system, then emergence may allow movement towards a higher goal without you directing it. And the final point is politics. I don't know if it's been mentioned greatly today, but we're dealing with an adversarial political system which doesn't sit well with complexity. So you get elected by saying, I have a plan which will work. Rather than saying that policy is definite solutions, the idea from complexity theory would be to see policies as experiments. That is very difficult in the political environment we live in. Some will always claim that they have the absolute and definite solution, and will point out any adaptation that occurs. So my response, some points to consider.
Thank you very much, Michael. Julian, did you want to respond to any of that before I throw it to the floor?
No, well, I do think that if you think of systems, governmental systems, as a set of sort of subsystems with networks between them, people, I think, confuse the kind of, let's say, the Treasury checking up that you're doing your finances right with democratic control. And I think that there's a different kind of communication link that is responsive to Parliament, compared with, as it were, simply pure management. At the moment, it's all, it's all sort of in one kind of communication stream, and then that leads to this dichotomy between independence of subsystems in the bureaucracy working, in my view, much more effectively that way, versus the people who are then saying, oh, well, we've lost control. And I think we need, it's an interesting thought that came to me this afternoon, we need a different map of communication. One for democracy, as it were, and the other one for essentially responsive, mechanistic issues. At the moment, these are all muddled up together, yeah. and you lose it.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's an important distinction. Okay, so I'd like to open up to the floor to challenge Julian to any of this. Any takers?
There's a question.
Claudius, did I see your hand go up? Okay, Katie, just there.
A bit of a philosophical question, but it relates to your previous slide that shows this maverick of human behavior in that whole issue of the global situation. Lovelock shows in his Gaia theory that even though it's the previous one with the showing nature and
yeah, this one.
That even
no, he wants the pictures of the mountains and the
yes.
sun.
Okay.
He's a Gaia.
That one.
Gaia enthusiast.
He shows that even though the sun is now so many times hotter than it was a couple of million years ago, the temperature on planet Earth has remained relatively constant, and he uses as an example of the Earth being a self-organizing system. Yeah. It seems to be able to generate the capacity to adapt to a much hotter sun and still keep ideal conditions for life on planet Earth. So this is a complex adaptive system that is self-organizing, and now we've got this maverick that you show there called society. Policy then is freezing, using rational thinking, our current information. Is there a role for what was discussed this morning as the rational, the irrational, and the non-rational? Is there a role where humanity is going to be able to emerge to a kind of intuitive knowing as planet Earth has done? I know that's a philosophical question.
Well, first point I have to say about Lovelock is that there's no doubt that his book and his insights about the extraordinary way in which our universe on Earth, our atmosphere and climate, as it were, evolved by extraordinary interactions of the ocean, the atmosphere, and the rocks, and that's how we have just the right proportion of oxygen and nitrogen that doesn't produce endless forest fires or other problems. And the sort of Gaia picture then said, my goodness me, this is so stable. No matter what we do as humans, it'll all be all right. So Lovelock was a person who said, don't worry about pollution, don't worry about this, don't worry about that. It'll all be all right. Some of us were a bit skeptical about that at that time. One of the things I tell you about the newspapers, if you never change your mind, you're a boring person. The newspapers don't want to talk to you. If you keep changing your mind, you're an interesting person. So Lovelock changed his mind very considerably from this idea that this was a perfectly adjustable system. And now, of course, he's dead worried about society, and I'm delighted to say, he thinks that's important, and the humans certainly are changing it, and we need to have nuclear power and so on. But I mean, your earlier remarks, in fact, Charles Dickens was rather concerned about one of his chapters in Our Mutual Friend is all about the varying of the sun. It was a sort of a temporary Victorian concern. But I mean, you answered the point really that we now are in a situation in which humans certainly are making a big impact, and there was some question about this, but big countries like China and India and so on are now absolutely, they see these huge changes to their country. They're completely persuaded that the human influence is important, and they're doing something about it.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Ben, right at the back.
We've heard a couple of times today about how you actually can implement this kind of thinking. There was the MP this morning who talked about finding another scientist to make a different decision, which I thought was a really well-made point.
Can you speak louder? Sorry.
There was the MP this morning who talked about, can we do, I'll just find another scientist in order to make the decision that I want to make. We heard the gent talking about the securities, who I asked the question to about the problem with bringing this thinking into the political arena. It gets up people's noses. You're butting up against power configurations, etc. And we've just heard this question about the Gaia theory. You know, can we find the right? I think it was mentioned also that this idea of platforms, having the right platforms. So it seems to me that there's a big question here about what actually is needed in order to allow this sort of thinking to enter the policy domain. Is it a question of actually creating a new platform, given the fact that we currently have an adversary, you know, a political system, you know, that, you know, Prime Minister's question times kind of sums it up, in terms of actually having a policy that was reflexive, that had the possibility of losing a great deal of money, although something might emerge or adapt out of that, a policy that was much better. That doesn't seem politically expedient to me. And I'm interested in the panel's opinion or perception about actually how, you know, the practical nature of implementing or bringing this into policy making.
Well, I'm quite persuaded. I've been talking to a university in the United States which is sort of on the verge of doing this, of having more serious sort of system. They have a very large center, a global sustainability center in Arizona, and the American education system, of course, means that in the universities you study a range of things in your first year. You do mathematics and philosophy and history and so on. So, for example, most American arts graduates know the names of the planets, which they do not in the UK. They did in the 18th century. In the 18th century, any civilized person would know, more or less, you know, not only that he had 2 arms and 2 legs or whatever, but he also knew the names of the planets. So if we can move to that stage in which people have some elementary knowledge of the world around them, and that's a big if, then we would be in a position in which we could move to a position in which you could then have system courses in which you brought together people from, let's say, architecture and engineering and literature and so on. That would be my ideal, and I believe some universities in America will be moving in that direction. There is absolutely no progress in this country at all, except, funnily enough, the Tory government's cuts have led to the English department at UCL now teaching the physicist literature. So that is
coalition
progress.
Government.
The coalition. What did I say?
You said Tory government.
That's a political statement. As is yours. Anyway, I mean, I think we've got to, you know, do some quite radical thinking, and the OU, of course, is moving in that direction, but we're not. It's going very slowly. I don't think people haven't perceived the need to change the way they do things. My box 1 and box 2. I mean, the civil service entry needs to know box 1 and box 2. He or she doesn't need to know about box, you know, the 3rd level, unless you're an MI5. All right.
Could I suggest that decentralization might make it easier? There is kind of an implicit logic in some of this stuff of decentralization. You shorten the feedback loops. You enable perhaps to be more responsive. There's some evidence that chief executives of local councils, council leaders are much more comfortable with complexity, the idea to adapt, because they might have to see the system more as a whole, whereas if you're operating at a far more abstract level in central government, that may be more difficult. Indeed, that might point the way to more different layers of government, perhaps including mayors and so on. This may happen. It's certainly some indications that it's not quite the adversarial approach that happens at Westminster.
Thank you very much. Any more questions from the floor? This is your chance to quiz one of the lords. I'm going to go for Anne here.
It's just a really sort of basic follow-on question, which is that part of the reason I think that bureaucracy exists and that people don't perceive the need to change the way that we've always worked and don't perceive the need to see systems and complexity is actually that it's really easy to do it in a linear way and to do it in a way that we've currently done it, and we create these things to try and to give people kind of an excuse to do things in a simple way, and also many years of just doing it one way. And I just wonder whether you think there is the actual appetite and desire to change that can be built on, and the kind of human behavioural aspects of this that we've heard a bit about.
Well, one of the reasons why I think there is a sort of hope is is the notion of sustainability. This is an idea that is an attractive idea. You could say it's the religion. I mean, it's something that people, everybody, you know, who's against sustainability. It's again interesting to get the United States. I mean, in the United States, the first word time sustainability entered into their legislation was 2006 in the Energy Act. In the UK, it came in the, for example, the Welsh Government Act, in the London Act, and in the Local Planning Act. So, for example, when you put up a house or whatever it is, you have to think about that. Now, one of the interesting points about sustainability is that you're thinking into the future and you're thinking about a lot of interacting systems. And I think that you need to have a peg, a popular peg, a philosophical peg, a quasi-religious peg, to move the situation along. So I think sustainability is, you know, does have that role, and we could. But I mean, I always take this example, you know, of sustainability thinking. In the Netherlands, you have dikes, you know, and the dikes are getting higher and higher. They're going to be 6 meters because of sea level rise. And we won't have dikes. We're going to have cost-benefit analysis, and Essex will get flooded, as you know. But London will be saved. I only quoting Hansard. It's all right. But then the question was, in the Netherlands, quite rightly, you have windmills. Which, you know, now for 300 years, you've had windmills on dikes, all these beautiful plates, you probably see. But now, in Britain, we put our windmills here, and maybe our dikes or separation there. To put a windmill on a dike means you save immediately 40% of the cost of that windmill, you know, or the wind turbine, because 40% of the cost is the foundations. But even in Holland, which is a very sensible, extremely sensible place, and I'm a visiting professor in Holland, it was a big struggle to put the windmill on the dike. This has required two quite different parts of government to come together, so you fly into Rotterdam, you'll see all the dikes there with these windmills on, which is actually a remarkable piece. But even in Holland, you know, they had rules and legislation. If I have a dike, I've got to have a road on the top of the dike, and I've got to zoom from A to B, because, you know, to put your finger in the dike in case there's a problem, you know. And so. But you know, that's an example. You know, even quite a sort of simple thing like that requires a terrific sort of bureaucratical challenge and so on. But the costs and the interactions of that, and I think integration. We've been talking about integration today. Is integration complexity or not complexity? Well, the answer is you can integrate things so that things can behave more complex or less complex. And I think these are two things out there. How they connect is an area for researchers to think about. But I think government, but you see, in Whitehall, integration is a bit close to Stalinism, old-fashioned socialism, you know. But integration for sustainability, probably Cameron could hug a sustainability sort of concept, you know. And so we've got to move in that direction.
Thank you, Julian. Steve. Yeah.
So first, an interesting comment. Funnily enough, at UCL, we introduced a natural sciences degree, partly to follow Cambridge, but partly to try and encourage wider interests across science. And we've now introduced a liberal arts degree as well. However, the biggest problem is the timetabling. So actually, the systems of the decentralized systems sounds fantastic. You can take a course in anything you like, but you try timetabling it. It's almost impossible. That you just cannot arrive at solutions. Anyway, come to the questions though. One of the things you mentioned here was about information speed, and that's quite critical because we heard earlier on about emails clogging people's files, and I'm very well aware of that. But there are, certainly in our banking systems, we find that the things done electronically go at a speed that we physically cannot keep control of ourselves. So I wanted to ask your opinions about whether we need to study more about the speed of information versus the speed that we can react.
Well, we do. I mean, we had a discussion about this in the United States. I think last May, one of the computers crashed in one of the American Stock Exchange. And immediately people carried on trading, but they weren't getting the information, and then there was a crisis. You know, given that situation, presumably you've got to have some control of people's activities. If the information is suddenly no longer coming in or coming in too slowly, you've got to have a brake on it. And in a way, the banks the funny man who speculated on in the banks in Singapore, and he was carrying on with there was no information about what he was doing, and so once you've identified that problem, there are ways of dealing with that if people wanted to deal with that, or are they prepared for the possibility? Are they prepared to have crashes in their system? And at the moment, I think, funnily enough, the FSA and these other reports don't actually talk about the risk of crashes. I mean, that's the point, is that if you say we do not want to have any financial crashes due to failures of the system, we've got to have some better controls.
Richard Bronk at the back.
Sorry, Michael. Two things real quickly. It strikes me with your timetabling, you may have a complicated problem there, or a complex problem. It kind of indicates that you need to make a judgment about what kind of issue you're dealing with. Decentralization may not work for a timetabling issue, for example. And the second point around information is, I think what you've highlighted is need for useful feedback rather than just information as a whole. I think about performance monitoring. Performance monitoring is basically based on the idea that you know what you want to know in advance, where of course if you're dealing with some complex outcomes, the whole point may be that you are not measuring the most important things because you couldn't anticipate them. So just it goes on to the idea that if you have lots of information out there, that may be great, but if you can't interpret it, then it's not very useful actually. There's a lot of interest around big data right now. A good quote I came across recently was that big data allows you to be wrong with infinite precision. It's about the interpretation of information, and that is obviously has cognitive limits rather than just the simple provision of it.
Yeah, thank you. Richard Bronk at the back.
I'm a great lover of complexity theory, and of course everyone doesn't like vested interests against new thinking, but I'm getting slightly uncomfortable again about this attack on stable institutions and bureaucracies. I think it would have amazed Hayek and Burke, who were proto-complexity theorists, and there's a great value in the on the one hand, on the other hand balls, as Alan Clark once called the civil service, in actually forcing new thinking to defend itself to defend itself. And I'm slightly worried about this attack in the last two or three lectures about bureaucracy as an inevitable break on all things good.
Well, I think it's a good question because having been a civil servant and known a bit about it, seen this. It seems to me that the traditional civil service is extremely good on the one hand, on the other, when it's in terms of policy. But they're not very good at running buses, And that's the point. Is that there was much discussion about, to what extent should you? And this was Mrs. Thatcher's insight, seemed to me, and indeed the Fulton Commission of the '60s. You should hive off the running of prisons and Met Offices and so on, so on, so on. But you should have on the one hand, on the other hand, yes minister types in Whitehall. That's fine. Then they don't get in each other's way. What we've now got is a reversal in which the Health Protection Agency, is a very good job. They want to put it back in the Ministry of Health. I mean, it's you should talk to the civil servants. I hope this is Chatham House rules, and it's terrible, and it's all because of a strange theory. This is that it's more democratic to have civil service operational activity in a government department of Whitehall. I think that's not. We should have the as it were, the yes minister on the one hand, on the other hand, and they should be quite small. They should be quite elite, and they should be dealing with very high level policy. Meanwhile, it seems to me you should have rather vigorous agencies, but with obviously a very good communication system. The objection always to the agency approach. Given to me by one of my Labour colleagues, I'll tell you, it was that if you try to find out how many people were in the prison last night, somehow or other the minister wouldn't get the answer by 2:30 the next morning. Well, that seems to be bad communication between the agencies and the minister. It doesn't mean you've got to throw the whole apparatus upside down. So I hope I believe strongly in the response to politicians of an elite, policy department, but they shouldn't get their hands into all this other stuff.
I'm trying to look for Sue Richards. Is she in the audience? No, she's not. It's a real shame because Sue knows. Sue's very intimately familiar with the material we're talking about. Eileen, did you want to?
Well, I was also Eileen Conn from the RSA Living Systems Group, and I was once in Whitehall too, so I come from a great care and concern about preserving some of the values there. Exactly. But I've also been very involved at local level on community activities. Right. And the thing that struck me when Michael was saying about decentralisation and some of local government being closer to being able to look at systems because of the kinds of problems they have, two things have come my way recently which I think perhaps illustrate this. One is the transfer of powers to local government or responsibility for public health. And so the National Health Service and local councils are having to get their act together with other people in localities to see about a new way of thinking of individual personal health. Yes. And how they organise themselves interrelated. The other one is in the co-production movement across the country, where local councils realise they're wasting millions of pounds on multiple interventions with failing families, and that even perhaps the solution is to have somebody living in somebody's house for several months, so that we stop all these multiple interventions. Now, in both of those cases, systems thinking is essential and integral. The other thing about it is that, well, I mean, for that reason, I'm beginning to wonder whether the way into the systems thinking training that we need all over the place is actually through local level. Local government has a very strong training process. Is anybody doing anything about systems thinking training at local government level? And how could that then be spread from there, because they're much more rooted in the issues. But the other thing I'd say, which is slightly questioning what you've just said about the elite in Whitehall, which has some attractions, but on the other hand, when you look at personal health and well-being and co-production of social services, it's all in the implementation, isn't it? The policy. And so that gets back to the point that Michael was saying, that you can't really divorce policy formulation from implementation.
Okay, thank you, Eileen.
But can I just say, I mean, clearly one of the successes of in the area of social policy in the last 10 years was Sure Start, was to identify there were, whatever it was, 40,000 families in Britain who were particularly at risk, and to bring a whole lot of agencies together. That was very much a ministerial, Whitehall central idea, and it obviously went down through all sorts of levels, and I think it meant, from what I've heard and seen, was quite a success. But
actually didn't get to the people that the policy was intended.
Oh, well, it did in Ilfracombe, but anyway. Where I know an arch Tory who's now persuaded by your anyway. I mean, I can take your evidence, but generally speaking, I agree with you. I was a local councillor first, and the way you could do things in the local council was remarkable, connecting things up, and so we've got to optimise that. But maybe you have a view about this.
Yes, I mean, I just want to also mention, in response to the previous point, I'm not attacking bureaucracy, actually. I didn't say that. I just was saying that there is a model of policymaking which is widely propagated, which could be improved, I would say, by applying complexity thinking to it. That it's still very much kind of challenged the status quo. I'm not saying that there's blanket centralisation or blanket decentralisation. I'm saying that you need to have people who are equipped to kind of make a better informed judgment about the level of centralisation and decentralisation. And I think in terms of local government, people seem to forget as well that I think it's still going. The local government has a fast stream equivalent programme called the National Graduate Development Programme, which would seem to be a good starting point for some of this, because it would strike me that this is exactly the kind of issue that you come to realise perhaps while you work in local government, and it may be good to have some theoretical complement to it to enable you to accelerate that process of learning. So I'm just agreeing, I'd agree with that.
Thank you very much.
There's a question right at the back.
Okay. Yeah, question right at the back.
Thank you, Zoltan Zavadi. I think that the first presentation from Paul Ormerod showed the development of a paradigm shift. I think it was in attitudes towards debt. And what occurs to me is that here we are talking about what's the appropriate governance and policy-making structure for a particular issue. My area is sustainable energy and climate change. Could you comment on whether governance and policy structures might vary depending on the stage and status of a specific issue? So, you know, you may need one governance structure for when something is an emergent issue, another when the paradigm shift is taking place, and then another once you actually got to get on and, you know, implement something. I wonder if you have anything to say about that. Thank you.
What I was going to say is that one of the, partly to refer to James McIntosh, if you've been in Whitehall when war is declared, or there was suddenly a war, you see that we still have this extraordinary imperial government. There's a sort of regime in Whitehall. Suddenly everything clicks into action. War is great, particularly providing the war is abroad. By the way, I should say, you know, if you have a problem in Hackney, that's another question. And then the whole system absolutely switches in. All the departments know exactly what to do. It's quite extraordinary. And some extraordinary sort of, as I say, there's a gene somewhere or other in Whitehall that clicks in. However, when there is a social problem or a economics problem or a scientific problem, then, you know, we're back to the departments and so on. And sadly, it seems to me, I mean, climate is your interest in climate change. I mean, in a way, that was some, close to the war sort of thing. I mean, the Climate Change Act, which in my view was over the top, but anyway, be that as it may. I mean, it was an extraordinary act, which and an activity across Whitehall, and the creation of a new department and so on. So in many and the structure of government changed for the purposes of that action. So, you know, given a serious enough problem, the system does respond in that way. I think much more so than in many other governments. I mean, no other government in Europe has made that sort of change for that reason. So, I mean, in principle, I agree with that one has to make changes, have to be made, and I think, in fact, because it is so centralised, our system of government, they do make changes. I mean, we heard about the formation of COBRA in response to certain things happening through threats. So, but the question is, so they have the capability to change, and therefore from that capability we could change to a new direction, which is a more system, for example, approach. But we're waiting. That's a sort of, these meetings like this may eventually trigger that change.
I think it's a very good question, because departments, of course, the modern department was basically established in the 1918 Haldane report, which took basically a rational view of, you come up with an abstract notion, how do you form a department to address that? Yet, over the last, well, from 1907 to 2009, £400 million was spent reorganising departments when a new solution was imposed on a messy reality. If you look at Scotland, what they've done is basically got rid of departments and had a much more fluid structure based on units which can be moved around to respond to issues as they develop. And of course, there's some reason to think that a similar thing might work. Of course, the question is, does it work on a much larger scale?
Michael, thank you very much.
By the way, the Met Office is 150 years old and has just had its history book. So you want to have an organisation that keeps on plugging away. And one of the interesting points about that organisation is that it was very open. There were several absolute crises in that organisation, whether or not you should use computers to do weather forecasts, for example, or whether you should have automatic things. And the discussions of the organisation were entirely open. And there were articles, virulent articles, written by officials in the Met Office about it. And so it shows that if you are an open organisation, you allow contrary opinions, which is all our system approach, your organisation could last for 150 years. So on that point, I must leave you, I'm afraid.
Can everyone join me in thanking Julian? Thank you.